Okay, so a little bit about us for anybody that is new here. For anybody that's been here for a while, I apologize. You know, you hear the same spiel every single time, but for anybody that's new, Jenna and Allison and I are the people who present these events and put on these events every month. And a little bit about our background is that we were established in 2017 after we were inspired by going to another Women in Tech event. And we saw the wonderful women there and we wanted to know them and meet them all. So we decided to make our own group so that we could see them more regularly and get to know them. We had our first event in January 2018. At that time, we kind of said if 5 people show up, we would be happy. And we ended up having 30 people come. So we realized that it wasn't just us, that there was other women too that wanted to know other women in tech in the area. So we said, as long as they keep coming, we'll keep doing them. And that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years now. So in February of 2019, we had Jenna Gaudio. So Allison and I co-founded it. And then in 2019, Jenna Gaudio joined us as executive director. So we're super happy to have her on. She's a friggin' powerhouse. Our mission is to support, educate, mentor, and develop a network for women in the information technology industry. And we're focused on building and maintaining a local community that will fulfill the needs of women in tech, both personally and professionally. We also do community outreach. So we had an initiative where we raised money to send and facilitated sending girls to coding camp that were from Asbury Park High School. This year, we're going to be doing it from the middle school, but because everything's remote and with COVID and everything, it kind of got crazy. So we're picking back up in April. And the cool thing about it this time is that we're going to be able to integrate it into their curriculum, which is super, super cool. We don't have to worry about transporting them anywhere. And they don't have to do anything outside of school. It could be right inside their curriculum, which is super cool.
That's it.
And yeah, we just want to say all are welcome. We do, again, like the point is to try to support women, but you know, not a man haters group. We love men. Men are welcome. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We mostly post our events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. But on Facebook specifically, we do have a private group that you can join. And that is where people kind of you know, anything you need to celebrate. Did you get a promotion? Any kind of accolades, suggestions for other meetups, classes or workshops, or other events that we might want to go to, share any relevant articles or blogs. If you're looking or hiring, we've had a few people actually get jobs through just posting in our Facebook group, so that's cool. And then just, you know, asking for advice, you know, need help, give any information. We just love to hear from you. So we always have great conversations on there. Always looking for speakers. So you could go to jerseyshorewomενintech.com and fill out our speaker application. You know, whether it's you or somebody that you know, if you have a suggestion for somebody that you want to see, maybe you've, you know, been wanting to hear from them, please let us know. We'll reach out to them and see if they're interested in speaking for us. And our wonderful sponsors, who we wouldn't be here without. So one is CoWorks and the other is Vidya. A little bit about them is CoWorks is where we used to have our in-person meetings and hope to have them again in the future. But it's a cool space in Asbury where people, you know, have co-working, like a big open office space where you share a working environment with other like-minded people, mostly people who have their own business or would normally work from home, but instead want to be around people and not go stir crazy in their house. So they have a great setup, you know, coffee, fridge, printers, all of that. Phone room. They also have private offices as well. They obviously host events because that's where we go. And they have private meeting rooms. Outside of the one in the Lake House building, they also have one in the High Voltage Cafe building, which is right next to the train station in Asbury Park. That's all private offices. So that one's really cool. And then they just opened this one in Red Bank. So this is right next to the Dublin House, if you're familiar with Red Bank. And again, this will be 8 rentable private offices. So any questions about that, you can reach out to team@coworking.com or just visit coworks.com, for which I helped build the website. Vidya is where I work and where Jenna works. So we're a music and media tech company located in the Bellworks campus in Homedale. Right now, most of us are working from home, as I said. Vidya powers the business side of music labels and media companies through an all-in-one platform that allows users to manage content, rights, payments, and view reporting on analytics and revenue. And Jen, I'll let you take the floor if we're hiring. I know that we're hiring.
I was going to bounce that right back at you. You're hiring.
I've been looking for like crazy an awesome data engineer, mid-level, senior level. If anybody is interested or knows anybody that might be a good fit, I've been interviewing the past couple of weeks and we'll continue to the next couple of weeks. So next month, super exciting. I don't know if you guys have been hearing about this buzzword NFT or non-fungible tokens, but it's been all the rage lately. And if you're like me, you want to learn everything about it so you can be in the know. So this is a little bit of a different format that we've done before. This is actually going to be a watch party. So we're going to watch a YouTube video all together and then afterwards discuss. So I think it should be pretty cool. I'm very, very excited about that. So please join us for that. Always the 3rd Tuesday of every month. So that'll be in April.
Are we going to be looking at multi-million-dollar digital art pieces?
Not in this one, but maybe in another one.
It was so cool, right?
Very, very cool. Okay, so at this time, I'll have everybody please mute your microphones, and I'll introduce Danielle, who's going to be our presenter today. For anyone can make a website, everything you need to know to create your website for you or your business. She's the founder of Paperback Web Development. I'll stop sharing now. So Danielle, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and then kick it off for us.
Yeah, so I'm Danielle, and I mostly deal in WordPress. I specialize in maintaining WordPress sites that are a little bit more complex that maybe we didn't build, but you need somebody to help take care of. But we also build custom websites or more complex websites. So e-commerce, anything that needs to be integrated with a bunch of stuff. And so anything that's really complex like that. But then we also do a website in a day. So if you need something to just get up and running. So we mostly deal in WordPress. But I also like to talk about websites. So I, will often talk about this type of stuff where we're going from beginning to end, or I have a course to help you, create a website. So that's kind of where I spend most of my days is in and around WordPress. So let me share my screen here. I'm just going to share this guy, and then I can see if I can I'll keep the chat up. Just in case there are questions as I'm going, I'd hate to do something in the beginning that is a little bit more technical and then have to wait till the end. So I will keep the chat up here. And if you have a question, I can either save it if it's more general, or if it's to directly what I'm talking about, I'll repeat the question and address it as well. So this group here has a lot of different skill levels and a lot of different, bases for what they know. So this is going to be more of an overall beginning to end kind of thing. So as much as I specialize in WordPress, if we have a little bit of time at the end, I can do a brief walkthrough and, so that you can see how it all looks. But this is more going to take you through the process and hopefully set you up so that you can then go in and play around and get yourself your website. So all websites have 2 components in common no matter what you're doing. You have a domain and a host. And so why are we starting here? You can just go sign up for Squarespace, get a website, and just start building. Purchasing a domain is the most common thing that you'll do in order to become a little bit more professional. So if you need to purchase your website, you need to then connect that. If you need to do something that's a little bit more technical and you need something other than Squarespace and Wix and you have to use a host, this is the part that I feel that I get the most questions or the most like blank stares about. So I really wanted to spend at least a little bit of time going over these two things so that you have that basis. And so even if I'm going a little fast, you at least have the verbiage and the vernacular to be able to talk about or Google these things going forward. So we're going to start with domains. Now, like I said, keep in mind that I will go, we will be talking about things that are a little bit more technical. So it's okay if you don't understand. Just sort of take screenshots and then take these words and sort of Google them later, or ask me a question as I'm going along. So your domain or your domain name is sort of the basis for all of your stuff, right? So the internet works on IP addresses, but we as humans don't think in numbers, we think in words. So a domain name is just a visual representation of where your files are in an IP address. So basically, a domain sort of houses two specific things. You have your instructions, which tell everything where to go. So when somebody looks up a domain name or sends an email or does something with that word representation of that number, it's basically just looking for a set of instructions to then know what to do with it. And those are our DNS records. And then you also, that second part of that is your name servers. So these two relate to each other. I started with instructions just so that we can understand what DNS records are. So you have your name servers. So basically you purchase your domain, and then every domain has a set of name servers. And that's basically, where are my DNS records? Oh, they're over here. Okay, let me go look for them. So it's basically just a string of like requests back and forth. So when you type a URL into a web browser, website.com. Okay, so website.com, the browser is going to say, where's website.com's name servers? And then they're going to go find them. And the name server is going to say, okay, you can find your instructions over here. So the DNS records, our main instructions that we then get redirected to are going to be email and URL. So this is what we're going to deal with. Basically, there's a ton that you can deal with. Basically, we'll talk a little bit about email, and then most of the work is done on URLs. There's a distinction between URL and domain, depending on your sort of context. You can use domain, URL, website. They can all sort of mean the same thing, but when technically your domain is sort of the main overlay, and then you have your URL, which is like https://www. That's your whole URL. And then email is your MX records. So if I have, my email is info@pbwebd.com. So when somebody sends me an email, it looks for pbwebd.com, and then it goes, oh, where do I send this email? Where do I go? And then it sends the email. So everything gets funneled through your domain and then out. And then some of these web builders that you'll use will also utilize subdomains. So those are also a records. A subdomain is basically the little piece before your main domain. So if it's sub.website.com. So again, this is a lot. If you've never heard any of these words before, sort of just take it in. I have a visual later for you to be able to, as a visual learner, there's a little bit of a map that I've sort of put together. So just sort of let it wash over you, and we'll move on a little bit to the second part, which is hosting. And this is slightly more important than domain because you might not ever have to touch your domain. Once you set it, you can tend to be able to forget it. So you sort of be able to direct your domain where it needs to go, and then I'm done. But your hosting, you might have to deal with a little bit. So hosting is basically an external hard drive for your files that your browser reads. So it's a server sitting somewhere in a building. Ideally, there's multiple servers that will then deliver the files. So this is our storage space for our address. So basically you have a company that you go to and you say, excuse me, I'd like to have a website. And they're like, cool, I've got a server. I can give you some space on it. My server connects to the internet. And so that's all a host is. You're renting space from them. And all websites, even Squarespace, Wix, they all are hosted somewhere. Their price is just sort of they're charging you to use their software, and their hosting is sort of like bundled into that. Every website has a host. You just might not have to purchase your own. You can sort of buy from them. So in order to have a website, you have to have a domain and a host. And the way that you obtain those things is going to vary. So that's why I wanted to present these two things for you so that you're prepared to make an informed decision based on your needs. You don't have to be, afraid of WordPress because you have to go buy a host. Everybody's a host. It just depends on where you buy it from. So in order to take some of the overwhelm out of staring at these things, I did brief screenshots. Again, you don't have to know what these look like, and it will look a little bit different depending on who you're using. So if you remember, we have our domain, and then we have on the left here, we have the example of what a name server looks like. So I type in a URL, and so it could be GoDaddy that I bought it from. I can buy it from Namecheap. I can buy it from SiteGround. I can buy it from a million different places. There are so many places you can buy a domain from. And all of them will provide you with your name servers. And that's basically just going to be where, okay, I don't need to be locked into where I purchased this domain. My domain has a name servers attached to it. So this way, my name servers right here in this picture are pointing to Google domains. So this is on, I have a domain that I purchased from Google. And then I also have I have my DNS records, my instructions at Google as well. So my name servers look like Google. That can be, it's usually 2 to 4 little strings of entries here. And if you sort of look briefly at that bottom right one, this is an example of a host that I've purchased. So I've gone to SiteGround and I said, SiteGround, I want a WordPress website. I'm going to buy your servers from you. And they say, okay, cool. Here's your account. Your website server address is this IP address. And if you want to tell your domain where we are, we're here. So if I went to Google and I said, okay, here, Google, I want all of my stuff, just forward everything, all of my instructions, everything I'm going to keep at SiteGround, I would use those name servers in the bottom. If you look at the top right picture, those are DNS records. So if I wanted to keep all of this the way it is, you have, like I said, you have the A record and the MX record. So you have your website record and your mail records. So I have my mail being sent to Gmail because Google, I've purchased email hosting from Google. So I'm sending my mail over to Google. You can also send it to an IP address. You can send it to anywhere that you want to purchase email hosting from. So if I wanted to leave everything the way it was and only use SiteGround for my website, I would take that IP address and stick it in that A record up top there. This is probably the most complex part of it, taking those words that we just learned and applying it to this. But basically, if you have a really good host or if you have a really good place that you purchase a domain from, they'll be able to direct you to tell you what to do. But this way, you're at least familiar. So if they say, so if you're chatting with SiteGround support and you're like, I have a domain here and I want to point my website here, they're going to say, okay, take this IP address and put it as an A record. So then you would go to where your domain is. My advice is always, if you don't know what you're doing, only edit the A record of your DNS. So if you don't take anything else away from this, just know that on the right side at the top, that's an example of DNS records. Those are your instructions. The only thing that you would ever need to touch if you don't know what you're doing is that A record and that IP address that's there under data. So if you needed to switch that up, you wouldn't necessarily mess anything else up. You would just be telling, when somebody types in your web address, they're going to say, okay, cool, let me go send the website here. If for some reason it's the wrong IP address, then you just change the IP address. Like, it's nothing catastrophic. But if you change your name servers, then it's going to look somewhere else for something. And then it takes like 24 to 48 hours to update. And so if you don't know what you're doing, you can ask me, send me an email. But that's going to be the most common thing you're going to do. You're going to buy hosting somewhere, or you're going to go to Squarespace and say, hey, I want my domain to go here. You're going to take the IP address they give you and stick it in there. So that's the most important takeaway from that. That's what I wanted to get across to you. No matter what platform you're using, you will probably have to deal with a domain at some point. But luckily, like I said, it's sort of a set and forget kind of thing. But one more component to this is browsers. Obviously, we have to access our websites from something, and browsers let people do that. So they basically will read 3 programming languages and display the combined product. And so the servers that we had, our host, will take all of our files, because we can interact with website files before, after they load, whatever. They take all of our files, they do what they need to do, and then they'll just deliver these 3 things. So if you're familiar with, like we had somebody mention React in the beginning, we have Vue, we have all of it, PHP, we have all these languages, but the browsers don't read that. So that's why we have a server. It does all of our stuff for us. So Squarespace, Wix, WordPress, you're basically taking this stuff, making edits to your files, and then plopping it back on the server. So ultimately, it doesn't matter what builder or what platform you use. Browsers are seeing these 3 things. So that's why a lot of, which platform should I use is going to be very subjective. It's going to be very personal. Depends on what you need. It depends on what your goals are. It depends on what your skill level is. Because ultimately, if you're sort of optimizing what you do, things are going to have different speeds and different load speeds. And like, there's going to be little things, but ultimately you're basically just building your files so that the browser can read these 3 languages. So that's why all websites are essentially boiled down to the same thing. So this is what I was talking about the visual, just for if you have more visual learners. Basically, we have somebody types in the website, they go to the URL in the browser, and the browser goes, okay, cool, here's the domain piece of this. Let me go find the domain, translate that into IP address, and then they go out and search out on the internet for the server that then, that has that domain. Okay, here, found the domain. And then they go, okay, what are the name servers? They grab the name servers. Name servers tell them where to go for their, their instructions. So right now we're in a browser, so it's looking for the A record IP address or the subdomain IP address. They go, okay, got the IP address, cool. I'm going to take this IP address, and now I'm going to go to that IP address, grab the stuff from the server, and bring back what the server gives me. So the browser requests the files, server processes the files, sends the code back to the browser. And then, like I said, you can interact with your server files after the page is loaded. So basically the server sends an initial process, the browser reads, takes that, reads it, delivers it to you, and then you can like do stuff back and forth after that. So this is sort of just a visual. After this, it's going to get a little bit more, we're going to bring it down. That was all the technical stuff. Like I said, I find this to be one of the most important and the easiest to misunderstand. It's so confusing, but it's so important, and because all websites start from here. So I thought it was really important to sort of just give you that overview so that we have that baseline to understand, and now we can just make a decision. Now we don't have to worry about, is this going to be the right one? What if it doesn't do that? Eventually it's all going to get to the browser the same way. So we're going to go and make a decision about how we're going to build our websites. Now we get to build. So in this presentation, I'm sort of going to walk you through the process of building the site. In future sort of meetups, or we can do, a separate walkthrough. We can, if we have a consensus of, I want to learn Wix, and then we can go in and walk through Wix, or I want to learn WordPress, we can go in and walk through WordPress. I want to make sure that I'm laying out all of your options so that you can make your decision for yourself. Once you've made that decision, then we can like have a walkthrough day, or, have an actual building day, things like that. So I want to sort of preface a lot of this with you're going to face roadblocks because you're building a website. People who build websites have other people build their websites for them. It's because it's hard to build your own stuff. So you're going to face roadblocks, and there's a couple ways you can deal with that. So you can jump right in. If you're sort of a tactile, hands-on person, you can jump right in, sign up for a Squarespace website, jump right in, play around. If you've decided that's what you think you're going to use, go in and play around with it. If you're not sure, you can sign up for a bunch of different ones. Try it, set a timer for 10 minutes, see how easy it is and intuitive it is for you to use. So, but you could also end up staring at a blank page like it's, an open Word document, and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Or you can have choice overload where Wix gives you hundreds of different things and you're like, what on earth am I supposed to do? So maybe jumping right in might not be ideal. It really depends on who you are. When you feel like you're ready to build, that's when you plan for what you want on your site. So you can play around if that's the type of person you are, but then you're going to sort of return to the planning stage because that's going to keep everything rolling. So right, if you're a choice overload kind of person, it's probably best for you to do this planning stage first, because then at least you know what to look for. And you can then play around without publishing first, and then you can sort of, go back and maybe pick a different one, or, things like that. But if you're like me, you can use planning as sort of a self-imposed roadblock of, well, I have to plan, and then I have to plan this, and I don't know what this is going to be. So it's possible to overplan. So the idea here is balance, set goals, set maybe certain days that you work on things, or set certain deadlines for yourself and write it in a calendar or put it in your, desktop calendar, whatever it is, so that you keep yourself honest and that you're not sort of letting it run away from you or putting it off because you think it's going to be too overwhelming. So that's the whole point here, is I want to take the overwhelm out of it so you're ready to jump in. So what do I mean when we say plan and prepare for your site? So this, I have a course that I have like a whole 2 modules, maybe 3 modules on planning the site, because I feel like it's one of the most important things you can do. I'm going to write down, I'm going to just go through a bunch of questions. The key here is you don't have to answer all of them, and you also don't have to answer them all at once. You can do some, play around with it, go back, revisit. So these are some examples of some questions that you can ask yourself. So what is the purpose of your website? Not just because I'm a business and I need one, but why do you want a website? What point are you trying to get across? Whatever this question means to you, sort of just make it a long sentence, make it 2, make it 3 sentences, maybe no longer than that. Try to be concise when you answer these things, unless it's sort of a brainstorming session, then you can go a little bit longer. Identifying your audience. This is a whole thing. We've had UI and UX presentations in Jersey Shore Women in Tech before. There's all kinds of user personas. And if you wanted to deep dive down that, I would say do a little bit of your baseline planning first, and then deep dive, maybe even build a site, and then analyze what's happened, and then go into that deep dive. This is sort of, we're just trying to get a website out there. So we don't need to know, what they eat for breakfast. We just kind of need to know who they are, who's your customer. Is it people that you already know and, you want to update them on what's going on in your business, or are they new clients? What do they want from you? Do they follow you on social? Do you want them, just sort of identify who they are in comparison to your business. Again, this is just sort of baseline, quick questions so we can get an idea of what we're doing here. What do you already have to help you? This is a big one. You write Facebook posts, you write ads, you have graphics, you have a logo, you have colors. You're not starting from base 1. You've got something. And if you don't have anything, then, go make something. Start there. Have a little bit of an idea of, what your brand feel is, or, what kind of guidelines do you have? Do you have, any kind of standards that you need to adhere to? Do you need a disclaimer on your footer? What do you already have around? Do you have a bio that you give to people when, you're speaking in an engagement? Do you have a bio that you put out? Well, maybe that can go on your about page for now. What do you already have that you can use? And then these 2 questions I really like because they're very distinct, but they're related. So what do your visitors need to know when they get to the site? Are you a brick and mortar and they're quick trying to find you, and they're doing, Google searches, and you want Google to read your local SEO, and then they want to go to your, so do they need to know where you are? Do they need to know your phone number? Do they need to know, what your special is today? And then what do you want them to know? So do you want them to know about your brand story and how your unique positioning for, whatever it is you're offering? Or so your need versus want them to know, and that's going to help you get to the ultimate, goal that we're going to get to in this here. So once you've done some of those things, there's a ton more, what's services do you provide? What sets you apart? Do you have a mission? Are there common questions you receive? What is the one thing that everyone emails you about all the time? And, maybe you can start to write a blog post about that. So Once you've answered sort of those discovery questions, you can then start to outline your site. So this is huge because this is the hardest thing to do as a person who's making a website for yourself. You have one main thing. If somebody walks in the door of your store, your one main thing that they want, if you're sort of an office building, you want them to, get to know you and they have an appointment. And so they're coming in to talk to you. If you're a store, maybe the one thing is you want them to see your sale so that they then stay longer and buy. You have one thing when somebody comes to your website, one thing that you want them to do. If you need to, write down your top 3 and then pick one that's the most important. You can put all 3 of them on there somewhere on your site, but you need to know when somebody sees that top area, whether on a mobile, on a desktop, on a tablet, on a watch, whatever it is that they're accessing your website, what's that one thing at the top that they need to do, that they need to see? Is it, carousels are great, sliders are great, but most people are only going to see that first slide. And I'm happy to report that a lot of websites are moving away from sliders into this big hero area. And then you can also sort of have a call to action button at the top that's on the main, menu bar of your site. So maybe that's your main call to action. And this sort of embellishes it a little bit on the hero. And then you have, you can have pop-ups. I would say you really got to test them well because of phones and accessibility. I would delay it. There are also ways to only show it to them the first time they come to your site after 5 minutes and then not show it to them for 30 days. Pop-ups should not be your only source of leads. You can also put forms on the bottom of websites. So that could be where you put your second and your third calls to action. Maybe they're always on a call to action on the bottom. You can play with those other ones, but that main thing is, I can't stress that enough. One thing, you got to stay focused. So these are some specific examples of when you're outlining your site. I mean, you can Google, what should go on my website, basically. These are just some examples. Do you have, social media? Are you going to need the links? Do you have a portfolio, or is it going to be more of like a services that you offer? Do you have to accept payments? Do you need an event calendar? Do you need like all these feature kind of things? That's going to really tell you what kind of platform you need. So really think about what's going on the pages and then outline the pages that you have that you know about. So you want some kind of about. You want some kind of contact, whether it's on the footer. A contact page is usually a good idea to have, even if you have the info anywhere, because if you think about it, like I said, the one thing you want someone to do when they come to your site, maybe it's just to contact you. And so the reason they're coming there, they're not reading anything on your site. They're like, how do I contact them? So these are all the things you're going to think about when you're outlining that site. Like I said, as a reminder, doesn't need to be answered all at once. Get yourself a couple of things to get started so that when you're in there playing around with it, you can really fixate on some of these couple of things without getting too overwhelmed. So now we're going to get into some of the actual things that you use to build. There's 2 buckets, right? So you have hosted and self-hosted. Hosted websites, like I said, everybody's got a host. So hosted means that they're hosting it for you. They're taking care of all that business. You don't have to deal with that. It's hosting it for you. Self-hosted is I've purchased the host. So your hosted examples are Squarespace, Wix. Now WordPress has 2 different things. You have WordPress.com, which is, if you think about the distinction, you have .org is usually for like organizations and nonprofits, and orgs. Com is business side. So WordPress.com, you're paying them every month. They're the business side of WordPress. They could have done a much better job at making that distinction. But you also have, when you come to e-commerce, you have Shopify and BigCommerce. You still got Weebly in the mix. You got a bunch of people with Weebly websites. And then self-hosted is that WordPress.org. You've got, the bigger ones, Magento and Joomla, Drupal. Self-hosted can be just a bunch of code on some HTML pages that you put on your server. That's self-hosted, but that's not really a builder. So you can also grab some of that hosted feeling in WordPress.org, which is why I think WordPress.org, I think it powers, what number are we at now? 35%, 40% of the internet, because there's something called like a site builder or a page builder that you can stick onto WordPress.org and get some of that hosted feel while still having some control. So that's where the line does get a little bit fuzzy. But technically it's still self-hosted because you're buying your own host. So many categories, builders, platforms. There's GoDaddy has their own website builder. I think basically, all of the major hosts have their own builder now at this point. So there's a ton of hosted. The GoDaddy one's weird because it's technically self-hosted because you're buying it from GoDaddy and they're a host, but they're kind of hosted. So it gets a little blurry, but the main two buckets are hosted and self-hosted. So these are the kind of the things that that's the first decision you make is, do I want over there or over here? Do I want to go to them or do I want my own thing? There's a lot of arguments back and forth. You can find millions of blog posts about which one is better. It doesn't really matter because it's what's better for you. I usually, if you've never done a website before and you just want a website out there, I say go with hosted. Now, the argument is that you don't like own your stuff, because if you close down your Squarespace site, you don't then have your host around to grab your info. But I mean, the same can be said for if you don't pay your host anymore, then you don't have your files either. So the arguments are kind of back and forth. It all depends on who you talk to. So if you talk to like another WordPress developer, they're going to talk about why self-hosted is even better. If you talk about a Squarespace specialist, they're going to talk about why hosted is better. So it really just depends on who you talk to. So you can do your research and go to people you trust and see what they have to say, talk to experts. E-commerce, WordPress.org does have WooCommerce. It does get a little bit complicated. So if you're looking for something quick and easy, like I have an Etsy store, but I also have a course that I have. If you're talking about online courses, you can go to Podia or you can go to WordPress. So every time you do something, WordPress is really versatile, and that's why I like building in it, because I'm a developer, right? So I'm not necessarily a designer. I am hiring for if anyone knows of any designers, preface my little introduction. If anyone knows any designers that are around, I'm currently looking for some part-time help because I'm not a designer, I'm a developer. So I like the control that I get. So I can find but again, with open source, which is what a lot of self-hosted things are, because they basically make their files available to you and then you grab them. So it's open source and you can do whatever you want to it. It's not proprietary or anything like that. So the deal with that is then you might get some awful plugins or plugins that mess everything up or themes or whatever that. So this goes back and forth. Here's a by no means exhaustive version of a comparison. This is just sort of the points that I've touched on in grid form. The one that I do want to make a call out to is the bottom one, platform updates. Obviously, something like WordPress, I would say either you or somebody, whether you hire somebody or do it yourself, does need a little bit of TLC. You can now turn on automatic updates with WordPress. So if it's a great plugin that doesn't cause any issues, set it to auto update. But it can get a little tricky depending on, the more complex your site, the more it could interfere with stuff. And I don't usually recommend doing major updates on your main thing, whether you're using Wix. Wix, duplicate your site, do big things on there, and then switch over to that site, or self-hosted, do something on what's called a staging, then push it to live. So there's different workflows that are involved in some of these, but when it comes to price, which is the other main thing that people are going to, these are the two things, is it easy to use? Is it easy to maintain? And what's the price? So easy to use, hosted, super easy. That's their whole point. That's their whole deal. Self-hosted, some kind of experience is going to be needed. So it's just going to be a higher learning curve. If you really want a WordPress site, totally go for it. I'm all for it. But there's going to be a little bit more of learning involved if you want to do it right without having to then come to me 6 months later because everything's all crazy. So that's why I'm a big component of, if you want a website, do it on something that's easy for you to build and maintain. And then when you're ready, now you've had a little bit more experience. So you can either build your own WordPress website or you can have, someone like me do it. Price, that's where it gets a little bit exponential, right? So there's base prices. Wix has a free one. Squarespace starts out as a paid one, but you're basically paying for the platform, but then they'll sort of upsell you on certain things. So if you want your own domain, you have to pay for that. If you want payment processing, you have to pay for that. If you want So all of these things, that's why you create that sort of feature list when we were talking about back here. What are our features? What do we want? That's going to help you when you're comparing your websites. So that's going to give you that research foundation to be able to say, what are these people going to charge me for? Whereas self-hosted is a little bit more straightforward. Both of these you pay for your domain yearly. It's like $12 to $15, depending. I mean, it could be astronomical, could be crazy, but generally, so those two cancel out. So basically self-hosted, you're just paying for your host. There's a ton of really, really great free plugins out there if you're talking about WordPress. So, the price could be a lot cheaper. A good host will be anywhere from, I'd say $12 to $30 a month, as opposed to, Squarespace makes it super easy, but you can easily go up to like $50 a month and you're not doing anything special. It's just happens quickly. So that's sort of my basic comparison here. So we're going to just real quickly go through an example workflow for a builder. I'm just going to use Wix because they have a free one. And so that's one that you can use easily to try, but the workflow is pretty similar for a lot of these. And like I said, in future ones, I wanted to give this foundation. I think it's really important. And then we can always go in and like do an actual, I'm sharing my screen and we're doing the build, but that's more of a workshop-y type thing where you've already done some homework and you already know what goes on your site. So this is sort of a good preface to that, where you're going to go through the work of what's going to be on your site. Now we're going to go build. So Wix, you basically just sign up for an account. There's like a little button that says create a new site, and you just create a site, pick a template, and you just make little edits to it, input your content, save it. So once you get used to some of the controls, Wix makes it really easy. I kind of really was enjoying going through and writing out this workflow for what it would look like. Then once you're ready, you can either hit save or publish, and then it's going to ask you, do you want a Wix domain or do you have your own? And so that's why I wanted to, domains are pretty important. So now we have to figure out what to do. And so now you've got that baseline, and now you're not caught off guard. You can just start with the Wix domain, because if you're not ready to publish, just save it. And then you'll just say, no, use Wix domain, and then you're good to go. And you could just work on it. And then when you're ready to publish, you can always change it to your own, but they do charge to purchase your own. You can install any add-ons. I didn't really do too much research into what kind of add-ons these builders have. But they all do have some. It's some kind of like marketplace or modules or add-ons. They all have different words, means the same thing. My big thing is making sure that you're testing it. It's sometimes easy. You're working on your desktop, and then sometimes the builders will have a little like toggle menu where you can say, okay, now edit mobile or now edit tablet. But it's also good to just take it and visit it on your phone, or take your browser's, screen size and go in and actually do a little bit of testing. So you can say, oh, that one title is like gigantic on phone. They can't even read this. So now you know to go back in. So do a little bit of, testing, and then, like I said, utilize a duplicate site if you're testing some major changes. If you're adding on some kind of add-on and you want to see how it works, but you don't want anyone to see it yet, you can usually make edits and just save and not publish, but I don't like the opportunity to accidentally hit publish. So Wix lets you duplicate the site, do some work, whatever, and then you can either go back to the live one or you can switch over to the other site in Wix. So WordPress, self-hosted. WordPress is the most common self-hosted, and it's the easiest to work with. So that's why I always go back to WordPress. It's actually, there's more steps obviously, but it is pretty similar. You purchase a domain and then you purchase hosting. That's the separate one. And then depending on what host you use. So for instance, if you use WP Engine, which is WordPress managed hosting, different types of hosting can be another hour-long conversation, but you either have like shared general hosting, which is like a Bluehost, or SiteGround, or whatever those are, and then you have managed hosts, which will sort of make a lot of this easier. So you can go to Kinsta, you can go to WP Engine, you can go to, there's another one that I'm not remembering. But so those are going to do a lot of these things a little bit easier for you. So for instance, WP Engine, WordPress is right in the name. They only do WordPress hosting. So it's going to be really easy to install WordPress because they already do a lot of this stuff for you. Otherwise, these shared hosts will have like a one-click install, and you basically just install WordPress and you click the little button and it installs it for you. Configure your settings, go through, A lot of this is pretty basic. You can usually Google like how to, set up WordPress, and it'll go through all the menu for you. And then you choose your builder or theme. That's where it gets really complicated. And that's where you're going to spend most of your time. So you can use a builder where you sort of sometimes you have a theme, which is sort of your skin, the way it looks. The way WordPress works is you have your words that are on the screen, your content, your whatever. That's all saved in what's called a database. And then you have sort of your files and the way things look, and that's your theme. So you have these two areas. So you can sort of, it's kind of like when you're playing with on an e-commerce store, you're going through and you're changing the color of something. You're like, I would like red, no blue, no red, blue, red, blue. Okay, I'm going to stick with green. So, so you have this like color picker kind of thing. That's kind of like your theme. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's basically what the themes are. So you can have a theme in there and then also have something that makes it the experience of editing a little bit more like the Squarespace Wix stuff. So you're choosing a builder or a theme, you're installing that. Then you go ahead and make your edits, add any plugins that you need, build out your pages, and then again, test the site, use staging. WP Engine makes staging really easy. So for instance, if you have Elementor, which is a builder for WordPress, if you have that as your main sort of website skin and it has a major update and they're like, attention, be careful when you update, you're going to want to like use what's called a staging, and then you're going to make your updates and then push it. So this is the part that gets a little bit more granular, and it's also very individual. So depending on what theme or what builder or what plugins you have, that's going to define your workflow and your process for a lot of these things. Depending on your needs, that's going to define what plugins you have. So if you ever are like, I have a library of like 100 plugins that I like. So if you're like, hey, I need a calendar, what do you recommend? I can be like, use the events calendar. So there's some reputable ones that I do trust. And then WordPress, you do have to do a little bit more when it comes to like search engine optimization or security or these other things. So these are some additional things to look into. Some of them you're going to want to do no matter what website you're using. So accessibility, you're going to want to check that out. How accessible is Squarespace to people who are using screen readers? How does Webflow handle SEO? Because WordPress is notorious for being great at it. So you're going to, if that's a main concern of yours, you might pick WordPress, even though it's a little bit harder. Image optimization should be done no matter what you're using. That's going to be what most often will affect your page load speed. And that's sort of agnostic for what platform. Do you need to do some A/B testing? Do you need to integrate your email marketing list? Do you need to automate some things between ordering and fulfilling? Can you install your analytics? What kind of user experience for you when you're building, and what kind of user experience for people who are visiting your website? If all they want to do, if your only goal is to get them to come to your store, how easy is that to convey on your website? So these are, stock image sources. There are good ones, and then there are ones that look like stock images. So there are good ones out there. So these are all things. Security is also another twofold one, because you have security in terms of your website. Is your login secure? Do they have two-factor authentication? Is your database secure? But then you also have security from your user. Can you block cookies? Can you comply with GDPR? So there's all kinds of like security is both sides of things. Same with user experience. And so, I mean, that's kind of the main thing. This kind of breaks it down for you, because we sort of went through a lot. This is sort of like websites 101 in a half hour, which is that's a lot. So we basically know that all websites have a domain and a host, and also use a browser to access them. Domains are name servers and DNS records, and those two things together get people to our website. Plan first, or play around and then plan. But before you build your website, plan first. Pick a platform, choose hosted versus self-hosted, and then drill down from there. Play around, build your site, and publish. That is going to be the one that is going to be the longest and the hardest to deal with, obviously, since that's the whole thing. And then your work is never done. So use a separate area for edits and look into these other things. So that's how you build a website. I mean, does anyone have any? You can find me. I can leave this up for now. This is my website. I have a new podcast, so it's only got a couple episodes. I have a Facebook group. So if you do like WordPress and you want to have an area where you can ask questions about caring for it and making sure that it stays up and safe and secure, and, you know, maybe even some building questions, you know, I have a baby Facebook group, so you can join me in there too. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can ask questions about like specific platforms too. I don't want to go too far into detail because all of these things are at your fingertips, and it's really up to you what you want to decide. And I am a WordPress developer, but do not advocate for everyone using WordPress. I think it's really, you know, there's a time and a place for everything. So any questions? Any comments, concerns?
Yeah, I have some questions. Me. Hi, Danielle.
Hello.
And I should open up. Danielle has mentored and coached me, okay, for my first website, and also been a resource for my second website. So I have used Danielle, and she's great, great for helping you get a website up. So, and I'm still got questions as usual. Can you explain a little bit the difference between hosted and managed? So, for example, I have a site that's hosted on GoDaddy, but I chose their management package because I didn't want to have to go back regularly and update my WordPress themes, you know, up to date WordPress. I'm sure I'm paying more than I need to be because I should have been more confident enough to just know what to press update and what not to press update. But is hosted and managed the same thing or not? That would be my first question.
You have managed hosting is a type of host. So you have, when it comes to hosting, you have shared hosting, which is the most common. It's the one you're going to start out with. And of course, we're talking about self-hosted things. So when you start out and you're just building, you can usually sign up for like a really basic plan. And there's usually, like, if you go to SiteGround, there's like a 3-year package for like $5 a month. So it's really cheap and really easy to get started. And they have made it easier. They have launched a better dashboard, but you do still have to know some stuff, right? So you have to know how to get into a database. You have to know how to access, you know, your files through an FTP server. So managed hosting is not only going to be, it sort of is what its name means. It's being managed for you on some level. So they'll take care of a lot of updates, meaning they have software that will, I don't know whether it's visual regression or if they use some other kind of software to just sort of analyze pages, but they'll use their software to make sure that an update isn't going to break a site before they update a plugin or update a theme or update WordPress. And so they're basically taking, I would say, the stuff that I do for websites on a monthly basis. So if I have a care plan with somebody, there's a ton of stuff that I'm doing. But in terms of like maintaining, like the maintenance tasks of WordPress, they do about half of them, I'd say. So that's why it is a little bit more expensive. So instead of coming to somebody like me, if you're just sort of starting out, you have that staging area. So if you wanted to start a membership site and you wanted to install a plugin and see how it's going to work, you can set up staging really, really easily. And then you can make changes, and then you can either delete that or push it to your live and have it sort of merge. So managed hosting makes all of this stuff a lot easier. So GoDaddy does have managed. I haven't used their managed hosting before, but a lot of hosts are now, because they do have these like shared hosts, and it's taxing on their resources, and it tends to be a little bit slower. So you can get like a dedicated host. So when we were talking about IP addresses, a shared host, you share an IP address with like any number of other people. You can get dedicated hosting, which is the same type of thing. You're doing everything yourself, but you just have your own IP address. And so that could be easier if you're concerned about getting blacklisted, or like if somebody abuses your IP address on a shared host, that can become concerning. If somebody takes, MailChimp and imports a ton of garbage emails and it gets reported as spam, and it's like, so that could potentially affect your reputation. Dedicated just means you have your own IP. Then you have managed hosting, and that's what you have, and that they're taking care of some of that other stuff. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a little more expensive, but this way you don't have to think about it. So if you're deep into WordPress and you really are concerned and want to make sure that it stays up to date, there's nothing wrong with having managed hosting. It is a little bit more expensive because they're taking care of some of those monthly, weekly tasks for you. And they tend to have a little bit better support. I don't know about GoDaddy's. That's why like you'll have like WP Engine and like that's only managed WordPress hosting. So their support matches that. I don't know about GoDaddy.
And
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I'm sure it is only about 50% of what you'd normally get done.
Yeah. Well, because you have some kind of manual interaction, right? You need to make sure that like you have to go in there. Like if you're, unless you're a super basic site and you don't really need it and you just go on managed and it's fine. But like, there's some stuff you got to check on your SEO, you got to check on your security, you got to update. Like there's just stuff that you do as like a developer who's maintaining a site. So like, it's just, there's stuff that I do. But if it's a basic site and it's like a, 5-10 page site that you just throw up there and just leave, just because you need some place for somebody to visit because you want to rank on, Google My Business and local SEO, and you need a site to correspond with that, then you don't necessarily need me, but managed hosting is good to have.
Another question I had around that though is that I've heard that if you go with a bundle, like on a Wix, and they give you the domain and the hosting and then you decide you don't want a Wix website because it's not, serving your needs, you can't transfer your domain. You can't take your domain to like elsewhere. You can't move on to self-hosting because Wix have locked you in. Some of those other sites lock you in. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard it's a big downside.
I don't think it locks your domain in. You own it. When you buy a domain, you should always have, so if you go to a developer and they're going to buy your domain for you, you should still make sure that your name is on the domain. That is your company, that is your business, that is your name. So you should have all of your contact information on that, and you should be able to transfer a domain anywhere. Remember, that's just your top level like thing. That you might be referring to, like, you can't really take a Wix site and just like say, okay, I want it in Squarespace now. That just doesn't really, they have services where people rebuild your site in something else. But so WordPress, it can be, if you do it right, it can be easier to switch out a theme or switch out but like even those will have problems. So I would say that's probably 50% myth, 50% truth. So it really, it does depend on, but Wix has really become a powerhouse. They do a lot of really great stuff in there. But for instance, I have somebody that has a Wix website and they have their website, and then they wanted advanced forms where they have vendors and emails and all of these things go out and it's private. And so all I did was created a subdomain in their Wix domain. I said, here's the subdomain, send it to this IP address. And I created them a WordPress subdomain website. So it's a domain is a domain. And if that is true, then that's a problem. I feel like I would have heard about that.
Just a quick note on domains. One of the best pieces of advice that I got over 20 years ago from an overpriced lawyer: pick a domain name that's easy to remember, that's easy to find, and depending on what you're doing, something that maybe doesn't exactly match what you're doing now. When we started, we were going to be educationalnetworksomething.com. And he said, pick something short and sweet. And that way, if you decide this is not what you want to do, you can use that domain for something else.
Yeah. And it gets complicated because like if my website that I have right here on this site here, paperbackweb.dev, directs you to pbwebd.com. But that is a nightmare to say on the phone.
Yes.
It's phonetically awful. So
yeah.
so there's, and then SEO is this like half, hard facts, half like myth and like really weird ethereal. Now, if you ask an SEO person, they're going to tell you something different, but it all seems very theoretical to me. So like
Zumu.com doesn't really mean anything, but I have the coolest email address ever.
Yeah. So it really just depends. But you can forward things. So there are ways to take, like I might eventually change over everything to paperbackweb.dev. And so I might direct all the URLs individually and then like do a catch-all at the end. Or, you know, the other thing is like 404s are pages not found. That's not necessarily a bad thing either. That just tells you that like, here's what somebody's searching for and it doesn't exist yet, or it's broken or whatever. And now you can fill that hole. Like there's a whole bunch of theory behind like, but yeah, domain names, you can also pick something that makes sense, but like, yeah, don't lock yourself in. But also if you do, it's okay. Like I'm big on I find a lot of people have this like analysis paralysis thing where they're like, what's the best domain name to get? This one's already taken.
You
What
can
do I
always get
do?
more.
Yeah, buy like 3 of them. It's $15 a year. Just buy them and redirect them. I usually try to stay away from hyphens, just because if you're thinking about what somebody's typing on like a phone keyboard, what's going to be easy for them to type in. So that's why I had pbwebd.com. Originally, I was paperback web design, and I have that whole big long URL. And my dad was like, I don't want to type that in. What if you just do pbwebd? I was like, oh yeah, I could do that. And so that's actually really easy and short to put in. And so you could do like, you know, if you have those short link shortening services like Bitly or whatever, they exist because people's domains are really long. And then it also adds on tracking to links, but you can track links on WordPress too. Yeah, domains are a whole, you know, fun little rabbit hole to go down.